And he said, if you compare yourself to others the rest of your life, you're going to die a miserable man. But if you get better today than you were yesterday, the rest of your life, you're going to surprise the world on what you can accomplish.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I am fulfilling my obligation to you, which is to bring you amazing success stories today with my guest, Gary Cooper. Gary, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So let me tell you a little bit about Gary before we get started. Gary Cooper is the founder and executive chairman of Palmetto Infusion, an ambulatory infusion center, home infusion service, and specialty pharmacy that administers life-saving, curative, and quality of life enhancing specialty IV and oral medications. We'll probably have to break that down a little bit for everybody as we get into this, Gary. Gary is also the president and CEO of the Carolus Company. Carolus helps organizations and leadership teams get the most out of their businesses by promoting EOS, which many of you will know as traction, strategic services, board oversight, and M&A management. And I've been looking forward to talking to Gary for over a year here because he's had just amazing business success. In addition to the work he's now doing, which we described above, Gary has created, developed, and successfully exited 7 companies to private equity or publicly traded companies. In 2020, Gary and his business partner, David Goodell, were named Entrepreneurs of the Year by Ernst & Young, which is an amazing recognition, I will add. Gary believes in the old-fashioned values of keeping your word, servant leadership, putting employees and customers first, and simply doing the right thing. You can learn more about Gary and his work at palmettoinfusion.com, on LinkedIn at Gary Cooper, on Instagram at Palmetto Infusion, and the Carolus Company, is that Carolus? What is the website for that, Gary?
It should be caroluscompany.com.
Got it. Okay. All right. And with all that, Gary, I start every show with the same simple question. How did it happen for you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. I've been excited about coming on the show. How did it happen for me? It really is a question from my father, who was also an entrepreneur. And his question to me was, what are you going to do when you get out of graduate school? And I thought he meant a job. And I answered him, he had just sold his company to a publicly traded company. And he was the first guy off the farm. He's a self-made, from the boots up guy. And he said, no, son, that's not what I'm asking you. What do you want to do? Meaning, how do you want to change the world? And I was like, holy crap, Dad. I don't know what I want to do. I was thinking about a job. And I was driving back home to grad school that night, and we still had bag phones then. And I plugged my bag phone into the cigarette lighter, and I put the antenna on the top of the car, and I called him, and I said, I know what I want to do. He was in the nursing home industry and hospitals, and I called him, and I said, I know what I want to do. And he said, what's that? And I said, I want to keep people out of nursing homes. And I thought there was a silence, and I thought he would be upset with me because he had spent his entire career in nursing homes. And he said, son, why don't we start a home health care company? And that is how it happened. It was that simple. And I asked him, I said, is it that easy? And he said, it's not that easy, but if that's what you want to do, let's do it. And literally, I did my whole thesis in graduate school on the new reimbursement changes going through home health care. He got a certificate of need for home health care while I was in graduate school for the 2 small rural counties that I'm from. And when I got out of school, I came home to be a home health care administrator. And that was in May 27th of 1996. And it was still an outdated reimbursement system. And we did that for 2 years. And I got into medical equipment. I got into private duty nursing. This was before it was cool. And we did that until 98 when what I did my thesis on came into reality. And that was called prospective payment system, which is when the Clintons were in office. They radically changed the reimbursement system for home health care, Medicare certified home care. And that put 50% of the home care companies out of business in the country. Also 50% of the nursing homes in the country out of business. And so most people would say, run out of that business. And that's when my dad and I decided to run further into it. And so he gave me a line of credit for $1 million. And I'm 26 years old. I've never done mergers and acquisitions. I've never done anything like that. And I could only use the line of credit to acquire companies. I couldn't use it to fund payroll, operations, or anything. And so here's this young kid riding around in a Buick Regal and running around South Carolina. And I go around and acquire home care companies, and I bolt on medical equipment companies and this small infusion company, which later became Palmetto Infusion. And so fast forward from 98 until 2001, we went from 2 little rural counties in South Carolina, Georgetown and Williamsburg County, which is where I live, Pawleys Island. And we grew from about 2 million in revenue to 25 million in revenue. And then the founder of our company and my boss, and mentor, best friend, and father died. And a month later, 9/11 happened. And about a month later, all of my loans were called due in full. And I had about 1,000 employees. And it was a really, really dark time. And many times I've told people that that was, in many cases, a lot easier time to go to work because I had no other choice. I didn't have options. I had to pull myself up, pull my team up, and go to work and fight off the wolves. And fortunately, and this is a God moment, if I look back on it, I can see that it wasn't me that did it. The day before my father died, he introduced me to a man named Ron Welchel, literally 12 hours before he died. And that man later became my human resource director. And he brought with him our entire leadership team, many of which are still here today. That was a God moment. He put in a team that is still with me today. And I never would have made it without those people. So 21 years later, or 20 years later, they're still with me. So fast forward again, 2001, my job became, instead of building companies up, my father's goal and myself was to build up. At that time, you could go public with 50 or $100 million in revenue. Things definitely changed. My job became to take care of my largest shareholder, which also, I jokingly say, cooks my Thanksgiving turkey, my mother. Her goals were different. Her goals were help me liquidate these assets at the appropriate time, not immediately, but at the appropriate time.
Mm-hmm.
And I often say that the worst things that happen to us in life can become the best things that happen to us in life. It depends on how we look at them. And so that's what we did. We chose to look at this as an opportunity, and I got all of my partners. These were not sole proprietorships. These were partnerships. My dad was born on a sharecropping farm, and that's what we call it. We call it sharecropping. So I had partners in medical equipment, partners in infusion. I was the partner for home health care. And so we continued to grow those companies. I also ended up starting a hospice division in addition to the companies, because the goal was, how do we make patients, give patients the options to be at home versus institutionalized care, whether it be in the nursing home, assisted living, or hospitals.
Right, right.
And we got really good at it. Over time, the publicly traded guys, my friends, Bill Bourne at Amedisys and Rod Winley at Gentiva, continued to grow. And they came knocking on our doors. And we ended up divesting our home care business to Amedisys. Apria bought our medical equipment business. We continue to grow our hospice company. We continue to grow Palmetto Infusion, and eventually sold Palmetto Infusion to Brian Cressy out of Chicago, and eventually sold our hospice company also to Amedisys. Started our nursing home pharmacy company back, which was my dad's original company.
Okay.
And partnered with a company called Guardian. And my brother-in-law is still Guardian's partner today. And they are the third largest institutional pharmacy in America, maybe second, I'm not positive. And I was looking at myself again, where my dad was asking me what I was going to do. In 2011, I was successful, but I was also at a crossroads. What am I going to do? Because I missed providing care for patients who needed an option, because I'd sold all the companies that my dad and I had started and partners. I never want to miss that part, because my partners, who are also my dear friends, were also looking for what their next gig was going to be. And lo and behold, Cressy out of Chicago, who I admire greatly, they really were looking for the home infusion piece only, and didn't really have an avenue to ramp up that ambulatory infusion piece. And let me describe that.
Yeah, thanks.
That really, ambulatory infusion, to make it simple, it really looks like a doctor's office. It really looks like a chemotherapy office, except nobody there has cancer. They have diseases like MS, arthritis, asthma conditions, other long-term diseases where they get these drugs, which are fairly new. They're less than 20 years old. And they get these drugs called monoclonal antibodies, and some of them aren't monoclonal antibodies, but that's how it began. And they come in every 2 to 6 weeks. They sit in a recliner, and they get these drugs that radically improve their lives. Before, if you had MS, they were oral medications, and they maybe improved your life somewhat. We have some patients that have come in wheelchairs that were unemployable, couldn't get to work, that now don't come in wheelchairs anymore. These drugs are amazing, but they're also very, very expensive. And sticking to my original mission, these drugs you could only get in a hospital. So we created a place. Using Chick-fil-A is a good example in some ways, but it's a bad example in another. Chick-fil-A is one of my favorite companies in the world.
Okay.
we kind of chose that model because they're super friendly. They're super clean.
Yeah. Super polite.
Super polite,
Yeah.
and they're super convenient. The hospitals, unfortunately, can't meet a lot of those criteria because they're big places with big parking lots. So we chose to make them all the things that Chick-fil-A can be with no big parking garages. So patients with MS can just drive up to our place and walk in. And we also chose to make them in multiple locations in smaller towns. So you don't have to drive to Charleston or Columbia in South Carolina. We can have them in small towns like Myrtle Beach or Aiken or Supply, North Carolina, outside of Wilmington. So we put them in bedroom communities. And so we bought back Palmetto Infusion from Cressy and Company in 2011. And it was about a $30 million business when we bought it back with 20 employees. And today, 10 years later, we have 425 employees. We are about a $400 million company. We were in one state when we bought it back with 10 locations. We have over 30 locations now in 4 states. And we believe, I am very confident in saying this, that we are only just beginning.
Okay, so let me dissect some of what you laid down for us there. I think I want to start, Gary, with this question that your dad asked you when you were in graduate school, and you went through it, kind of, took us down the path. But I'm wondering, how long did it take you between the time he asked you the question and the time you were able to answer it? What was the time sort of frame like there? And what did you do to figure it out? How did you come up with this, I want to keep people out of nursing home thought or purpose?
I've told this story so many times in my career, I know the answer. I was a child in a nursing home, and I saw this little old lady back in the 70s and 80s. They would literally tie patients down. They didn't have drugs like Xanax and stuff like that to control patients. And so I was about 9 or 10 years old, and I saw this little African-American lady strip all her clothes off and defecate in the floor and fall down. And I told my dad on the way home that day that there has to be a better way. So you asked me, when he asked me that question, we were at our farm where he was raised, and we were working that day. I left the farm. I was driving back to grad school that night. And on the way home that night, I called him.
Oh,
the
right
same
away.
day.
Okay.
The same day.
Yeah.
And I called him that night and I said, I know what I want to do. Because it was ingrained in me. That's how we were raised, and that's what we did. And it was a powerful question that demanded an answer. And I think I went to school thinking I wanted to be a doctor. And when I got to college, I took cellular biology, and it kicked my ass. It just destroyed me. And I realized, man, I'm not a doctor. And I think the only reason I wanted to be a doctor is probably to one up my dad. He was a pharmacist. And I realized, man, my brain is not wired for science, but I loved healthcare. And so when I went to graduate school for health administration, I realized, man, I love this stuff. And when I was in grad school, all the people there hated doctors. They were ex-hospital administrators.
Oh,
and
okay. Okay. Okay.
they hated docs. And I called my dad that day and I realized it. And I said, man, I can't be a hospital administrator. These guys hate doctors. And he said, there's always room for a good one, buddy. And
Mm,
that's what prompted me with the questions. Like, if you're not going to be a hospital administrator, what are you going to do? And he had been in post acute. We call anything outside the hospital post acute. And he was like, what are you going to do? I was like, holy shit, I don't know what I want to do. So he said, well, you better figure that out. And that's where the question really originated from.
got it.
And then keeping people out of the hospital and out of the nursing homes was kind of the epiphany.
And before he asked you that question, I know you said you weren't really thinking about things in that way, but were you thinking that you would use your degree and go work for your dad before he sold his company? Or were you thinking, I'm getting out on my own and I'm going to, become you know, run a hospital or run a hospital system or something? What was going through your mind after the doctor thing kind of fizzled out?
You know, I think I always had this fear of being the kid that came back to work for my dad.
Hmm.
You know, I didn't want to be that guy. Um, you know, I didn't want to be given a handout. And it had to have just been ego driven. You know, I wanted to be the self-made guy.
Yeah.
And I would say that 90% of the reason I went to graduate school was to be able to defend myself from my friends and say, hey, at least I have a degree to work with my dad.
Oh, okay. As opposed to just nepotism or something along those
Right,
lines. I mean, yeah, yeah.
right.
Okay.
And so, you know, it's funny what our egos would do to us. And so mine was driving me away from a wonderful opportunity to work with my dad. And I'm so glad that it didn't drive me away from doing it, because I gained so much wisdom from such a wise man who taught me wonderful lessons.
Right.
Um, so I think, you know, first it was a doctor thing, then it was, you know, how can I do my own thing? Even in graduate school, the graduate professor, Susan Boyd, who was an amazing woman, wouldn't allow me to do my internship for my dad.
Hmm.
She
Okay.
made me go do an internship for someone else, which was probably the biggest blessing for my father and myself, to allow me to see how someone else was doing home care and bring those assets back to our family business.
Okay. And how long did you do that for?
It was only a semester,
Okay.
but
Okay.
they remain dear friends to this day.
It's funny, you've mentioned that a lot. It seems like everybody that you meet, partner with, and you've mentioned just a lot of names who have had an influence on you and who you remain friends with. I give you a lot of credit for that, because I don't think too many people, um, you know, maintain relationships for as long as you've apparently done, um, and in a good way, right? Everybody's still happy, everybody's still friends. So I applaud you for that. Um, when you mentioned the law change during the Clinton administration and how it, put 50% of nursing homes and 50% of home care companies out of business, or maybe it didn't, but they did. But you and your dad decided to run into that as opposed to run away from that. What made you think that running into that was smarter than running away? I am not familiar with the change in the law itself, and probably doesn't matter, but it sounds to me like it had a negative impact on reimbursement or some other sort of compensation that made it more difficult to be in the business. You can tell me if I have that right or wrong, but I'm curious about what made you and he think we're going to run into this and not run away. There's an
You know what?
opportunity here.
You know, I'd have to give all the credit to my father for that time. Um, that's where the wisdom came in. He recognized I did my graduate school work on that reimbursement system. And I also learned from the people I did my internship with
Mhm.
that there could be opportunity there. My father and my mother had worked so hard, and probably shouldn't have made that bet. Um, but my father was an entrepreneur from the word go.
Yeah.
So um, he actually called it. I love the way he talked. He said, "Son, why don't we go buy us some straw hats in the wintertime?" And what he meant by that was these things are going to sell really cheap, but they're going to come back. And so, what someone in the stock market would say is he was a contrarian.
Got it.
And so, he recognized that it was a temporary decrease in value and the value would come back. The other way he would describe things is he would say, "Son, you have to realize which wave to jump off and which wave to jump on." And so, another thing that he would say is that Democrats promise health care and Republicans fund it. And he didn't mean that really in a negative sense in terms of what we see on TV every day.
Right.
So kind of using his crystal ball was if you can stomach it and if you can fund payroll and if you can stay in the game long enough, go buy as much as you can and wait for it to turn around. I always like to think of, the movie Braveheart.
Yeah.
You remember when
Mm.
William Wallace was in front of his troops and he was riding the horse and he was screaming, "Hold, hold." That's kind of what it was like.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
it was my dad's money, not mine.
Right.
So he had the courage to do it. And so when the prospective payment system turned around, when things started turning around, he was the right guy. He made the right bet. So that was my first experience in betting on healthcare reimbursement. Now I've had several more experiences as an adult with my own money in that same scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Palmetto Infusion is the latest one. Ambulatory infusion centers, let's just call them those because it's easier to say. Infusion centers for a patient with rheumatoid arthritis. To get the infusion, just think about this for a second. To get an infusion in a doctor's office or an infusion center like ours, there's more than just us, is 50% cheaper than the hospital. So to get an infusion with us is $50,000 a year. To get the exact same medicine in a hospital is $100,000 a year. Plus, it's more convenient and
Right.
closer to your home and all that. It saves $100,000 a year. So we saw that 20 years before it became cool. So we started doing it 20 years before it became cool. 5 years ago, there weren't many people in this business. Now a lot of people are jumping in. And so when we bought the business back 10 years ago, everybody thought we were foolish. Now, 5 years ago, everybody started asking us, "Hey, what's this infusion thing you're doing?" Now we won the Entrepreneur of the Year award because people are like, "Man, you guys are really smart." We weren't really smart. We were just doing the right thing. We were doing infusions where they were 50% cheaper. So we've always followed what a patient needs and where it was cheaper.
And
And hopefully that works out for us.
the economics of the hospital being say twice as much for this infusion, is that it's not because the medicine, you pay the same for the medicine, I'm assuming. It's all of the other stuff that goes into hospital infrastructure versus what you can provide, in your centers that, to strip some of that away, or is it the bureaucracy, or is there a whole level of costs and procedures that just make the hospital so much more expensive?
Yeah, I'm never one to beat hospitals up because look, we need them. They're necessary.
Right.
But look, they lose money in the emergency rooms. They lose money in the ICUs. They're very expensive places to run. So I created my partners and I created a very inexpensive place to run. And this is all we do. We're not doctors. So doctors have to see patients, they have to do all this other stuff. So hospitals are very expensive buildings and overhead. So we said, how can we create a less expensive model and be really good at it?
Right.
To use a terrible example, because we're dealing with human bodies, think about Jiffy Lube. They're really good at changing oil. And they're cheaper than taking your car to the whole dealership.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I'm just the okay. Let's talk about the actual. First of all, those drugs are extremely expensive. Like, even if you're half the price, it's still tremendous. Were the health insurers driving this change as well? Where they're, I don't know if more people need this, as population ages, more cases of MS, more rheumatoid arthritis, that kind of thing. But was there sort of this push to go to this, to what you're doing in your infusion centers because of cost and cost reduction, and reimbursement from the health insurers, Gary?
That's a great question. There is, and it's actually called site of care shift. So the payers are recognizing, wow, this drug cost is really eating our lunch. We see it every day on the front page of the newspaper, right? And so every time that gets out there, they're like, how do we battle this? So one of the things that the payers are doing, United Healthcare, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, Aetna, all of them are doing is how do we get the patients out of the hospitals? And so one of the things they're
And
doing,
while still getting them what they need. I just wanted to make sure I
absolutely,
okay,
absolutely. How do we get the same drug as safe as possible, if not better, more convenient, all of the qualifications. And really what they're saying is how do we get them into places like Palmetto Infusion? And there's other places like us. We have a lot of friends that do the same thing we do throughout the country. And so what they're doing is they're coming to people like us saying, how can we get patients to you? So they're sending letters to you saying, hey, Mike, we know you got your infusion at XYZ hospital last year. You can't go there anymore. You have to find another provider. Here is a list of providers in your neighborhood that you can go to.
Got it. Okay.
And you're like, holy crap, I've been going to XYZ hospital for the last 5 years. I like Nurse Susie. I don't want to go somewhere else. And they're like, yeah, but it costs $100,000 a year, Mike. You got to go somewhere else. And then you go to a center like ours and you're like, hey, this is actually pretty cool.
Yeah, they kind of didn't know what they were missing, kind of thing. And I
Right.
reckon my mom's like that. My mom's in her late 70s. She's very used to the doctors and the places, where she's been going, and changes. Maybe even I'm like that. I'm in my 50s, you do get comfortable with the people you're working with or the place you're going, but you also don't know what else is out there anymore when you've been doing that for a while, right? It's just inertia can be a very powerful blocker to maybe a better experience.
Until it hits your pocketbook, a lot of self-insured companies are much more aggressive.
Yeah, push you. Yeah, they encourage you and they incentivize you to save money. Yep, yep. To do the right thing. Find the
Mhm.
best value. So I guess I know after your dad passed away, you had your mom. You talked about your mom. Um, your biggest shareholder was making you Thanksgiving dinner, I think is what you said. So you definitely had her, and her needs and her desires and stuff to focus on. But I'm wondering, as close as the relationship you described to have with your dad, Gary, how long did it take you to get, I don't want to say over it because you're probably never over it, but I'm just, my business partner passed away about 10 years into our business, and he wasn't my father, but he was a father figure to me, and he was exceptionally important to me and my stability and how I thought about things. And when he was gone, I really fell into a hole. I fell into a hole that where I felt stuck for a long time because I didn't. I'm not sure if I didn't know what to do or I didn't feel like doing what needed to be done anymore because I was just so heartbroken. And so how did that impact you? How long did it take you to figure your way past that incredible relationship?
Oh man, you really touched on a big subject. I think I had delayed grief of over 12 years.
Mm,
You know, I think I took the reins of responsibility on my shoulders as a way of running from grief. Um, I think I took that role and maybe ego, pride, and doing the right thing, and all of those things, and ran from it until we sold the last company. And then I had too much time on my hands,
okay.
and then it hit me. And they say that idle hands do the devil's work.
Yes.
I think busy hands can also, because I kept myself so busy. I have four beautiful children, beautiful wife, I had a really big career, a lot of partnerships. Um, and if I wasn't busy, I would find ways to stay busy. I ran 40 miles a week. Um, and then I got to a place where I had to have, my dad had 7 back surgeries before he died, and my brothers had 6 or 7.
Mm,
And I always said, I'm going to stay in shape and I won't have that problem. And I did, and I remained self-sufficient. And that worked for me, which self-sufficiency sounds like a good attribute, right?
yeah, it does.
Well, towering strengths can be towering weaknesses. And what I mean by that is I never asked anyone for help. And so then all of a sudden I couldn't run anymore because I had back issues. And then I had a back surgery. And then they told me I had to have both of my hips replaced.
Mm,
And one of the hip replacements didn't go well. And I had to have one of the hip replacements replaced. And I got in bad depression. And I think all of that ties back to delayed grief.
mm,
And it was a really dark couple of years for me, Mike. Um, and as it was, I put my partners through a lot of trouble, my marriage, my children. But what I've come to believe is that self-sufficiency didn't work. And it was only the asking for help and going through the pain and recognizing that um, some of the worst things that can happen to us can turn out to be the greatest things that happen to us if we put on a different set of glasses. You know, now when I see tough things coming, you know, at that point in time, things have gotten so dark, I could say, why me? And now when things get tough, I can say, okay, God, what are you trying to teach me? You know,
Yeah.
and I work with gratitude all the time, saying, okay, and I get it down to basics. I have a roof over my head today. My body is okay today. I've had a meal today and I know I'm going to have another one. And so when I was so busy, I call it chasing. I was chasing the next success.
Yeah.
What's the next big thing? If I just accomplish this, I'll be happy. And that never truly brought happiness. I think I was running from grief or chasing the next success or what the world says is success. And it wasn't until I realized, you know, the only success comes from within. And my partner, David Goodall, and I really are spiritual. We're Christian. And we're not overt about that in our business, but we definitely are open about it. And it wasn't until we started being humbly quiet and started serving other people and realized that our egos have no room for this. And we started chasing the way to serve other people. It's almost paradox. It's not almost, it is a paradox. When I quit running from problems and started chasing a way to serve other people, that is when my life transformed. But that grief, you can't run from it. At least I could not run from it. It
No
will
matter how
always,
hard you tried.
it was like an anchor that I couldn't get rid of until I addressed it.
And that's really interesting what you know, the running thing, you had the literal running thing, and then your body broke. You couldn't run anymore. And, you know, it's, as I'm listening to you, I'm connecting that mentally with the physical, right? And the emotion to it. So I keep busy, keep running. That's how I get away. That's how I forget. That's how all of these things happen. And then when I break, in your case, physically and maybe emotionally too, you said some dark places. You have to acknowledge and look whatever it is right in the eye, right? And you have to say, okay, like you said, self-sufficiency wasn't getting it done, right? And it was clear that things had to change. I know when I was going through what I described to you, I was in such a place where I thought to myself, you know, I want to quit. I don't want to do this. You know, why me? And I felt so entitled to feeling better about myself than I was feeling at the time, Gary. And you know, it's such a weird, unproductive way to think. Like, what am I entitled to? I'm not entitled to anything. But just like everybody,
Exactly.
there's another day. Here's what I'm entitled to. Another day, maybe. And what am I going to make of that day? And it took me, you know, I feel terrible even talking about it because it took me a while to get off that entitlement train or that mentality. But I feel like
I don't think you
so
should
many,
be there. I don't think you should be at all. I think you're human.
yeah,
You know, we're human, and you know, forgiveness, I believe, is what saved my life. And you know, it's an amazing thing to realize. You know, we're roughly the same age, and I don't know how you were taught, but I was taught if things get tough, don't cry, boy.
Yeah.
Work harder. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps.
Right. Right. I can do this. I
And
don't need help. I get this.
yeah,
Right. Help is
you
weak.
know,
That's
suck it up, suck it
yeah.
up.
Suck it up. Yeah.
And and all those things had to be relearned at age 45 for me. And what I realized is the most beautiful thing in the world is vulnerability is actually a strength.
Hmm.
When I can go to you, Mike, and say, hey, Mike, you know what? My life sucks right now. You know, could you help me with this?
Yeah.
People run to help. But if I go to you and say, oh, everything's fine, and you're like, I don't know what's going on with Gary. And then you go back and it's like, he's just didn't right. Something, we can't really trust him right now. But if I go to you and just lay it at your feet and say, Mike, my world is shit right now.
Yeah.
And here's what's going on. And I'm just vulnerable and open and honest with you. You will go fight for me. And that's what David and I have tried to do with our company and my family, and just be open and honest and say, look, I'm struggling and I don't know why. And that vulnerability and openness has really just, it's that paradox again. I thought that if I told somebody I felt weak, that they would see me as weak,
Right.
but they actually see me as strong.
Right. And I know I read somewhere that you said, something like, as part of this transformation, it was, when you're comparing yourself to others or to what you thought others were thinking or doing or whatever, the ideal that you're, moving toward to try to improve or whatever always seems to be moving away from you a little bit further. It's like the closer I get, the further it seems to be moving away from me. And when you change it and you just start thinking about what's going to make me feel better, right? What is success or purpose or whatever for me, it becomes a lot more manageable, right? Because you just cannot ever win that other game. You can't win that game. You can only win the game of where you can be, where you want to
This,
measure yourself against yourself.
this dear friend, you just hit the nail on the head. This dear friend of mine, he captured me one day and he said, you have a comparison problem. And it started with my dad, no question. And then it turned into a friend. And I hope he hears this. His name is Tony Strange. And Tony is one of the co-founders of Gentiva. And I love Tony to death, and his partner, Rod Windley. They're my mentors. I love them. And it started with my dad. And when he passed away, I guess I had to pick somebody else to shoot for. And and it became Tony. They became a publicly traded company and flying around on corporate jets and all that stuff. And here I am. I'm from a town of 1,200 people, this tiny little podunk town, and
Yeah.
went to work for my family business. And relative success is amazing. I sold a company one day for $20 million, and you would think, holy crap, that's amazing. It was one of the saddest days of my life because I was comparing myself to someone else. So this dear friend of mine named Mark Tassi, he said, you know what your problem is, Cooper? And I was like, what's that? He said, you got a comparison problem. He said, let me ask you a question. Are you better today than you were yesterday? And I said, I think so. And he said, if you compare yourself to others the rest of your life, you're going to die a miserable man. He said, but if you get better today than you were yesterday, the rest of your life, you're going to surprise the world on what you can accomplish. That changed my life. It changed my life because now I have an easy goal. the Gary of today, if he's just better than Gary of yesterday, that's easy. I don't have to watch anybody else. That is just revolutionary to me because I
Yeah.
don't have to worry about anybody else in the world.
I love what Tony told you about the comparison problem. Like I think it was him. You have a comparison problem. That's really strong, because so many, like, the world has a comparison problem, right? I
We
mean,
do.
like, and
Commercials make fortunes. Commercials and Facebook and social media make fortunes preying on our insecurities.
yeah,
If you
yeah,
just buy this, if you just buy this car, if you just take your kids on this vacation, you'll be a good dad.
yeah. The message is always, you deserve ... whatever it is that they're selling. And that whole deserving gets back to like the entitlement thing I was dealing with. Why is, so Gary, with the time we have left, I want to get into the how you changed as a leader and a business owner and entrepreneur after you had this, you and your friends. I'll call it a mix of a revelation intervention, and you changed your. It sounds like you changed, and your approach changed, and your
Yes.
leadership changed, and I'm really interested in how that occurred.
Well, you're right. It was a mix of transformation, intervention. We basically, when I say we, David Goodall and myself, went to our company intentionally and said, you know what? In the past, we have run unintentionally as a selfish company, and we want to convert this to a selfless company. We didn't know that servant leadership was a popular buzzword at the time. And there were some things I had to make amends for, where I had started doing a service and didn't tell anybody. For example, I would just do things and try to cram it down people's throats because I could, because I was the owner.
Yeah.
And I put David as the CEO because he's better at it. He's just flat out a better operator. I'm a great entrepreneur, but I'm not a great operator. And David made some significant managerial and structural organizational chart changes that signify to people, it doesn't matter who you are here. It matters that you put the company first. And that signals to the employees that title and anything else doesn't matter. What matters here is that the company and the employees and your contributions matter, not if you're Gary. And then our example was the biggest part. I'd led by example. I said, look, I've screwed up and stepped down. And that was a pretty big moment.
Yeah.
And then David started leading by example. And it's now we realize what's called servant leadership. And we started doing things like that. And I'll give you an example of what happened during the race stuff, the George Floyd stuff last year. During the George Floyd thing happened, when that happened, both David and I both called our VP of sales and marketing, who happens to be African American. And we both independently called him and said, look, they don't need to hear from me or Gary or David. You're African American. Would you mind, unfiltered and unscripted, talking to the entire company? All 350 employees at the time. And he's like, wait a minute, what? And we're like, they don't need to hear from us. We don't have the point of view that needs to be told to the employees. You do. And he said, I think I was brought here to be healed. And we said, we think you were brought here to heal people. And he said, well, what do I say? And we said, that's up to you. You decide. No script, no filters, no anything. You don't have to approve anything to us, from us or to us. And he held the town hall meeting. And so we have just literally unleashed people's filters, and they get to do what they see fit. And I believe that's why we won the award. Anybody can win an award based on numbers or growth patterns or EBITDA or anything like that. But that's the kind of culture that we're trying to create, where the folks are running the business, not us. We're filtering the decisions down to the appropriate people and getting out of their way. The only thing Dave and I did right with the race stuff is get out of the way,
Right.
and let the appropriate people take care of it.
All right. So that was powerful. Let me go back to when you said you made the shift from selfish to selfless. And I have some strong thoughts about this. So that's why I wanted to dig in just a little bit as we
Sure.
finish up here. And you mentioned the one sort of maybe selfish thing, like, you would cram something down that you wanted that, wasn't really part of the mission, wasn't part of, I don't know, maybe it was a pet project, who knows, whatever it was. And I guess I want to give, maybe that's one example, I don't know, but how, if you had to describe the company and your own leadership, how would you say it was selfish, and how is it now selfless?
I'm glad you dug into that. It's something that I'm now a Vistage chair,
Okay. I'm a Vistage
and
member myself.
I love Vistage.
Yeah.
What I was helping someone last month, and it's exactly what I was doing. I was spending more time wondering what the business could do for me, almost like JFK's quote. I was thinking about, what can the business provide me, rather than how can I serve the business.
Right.
I was wondering whether it be ego, whether it be title, or whether how it would make me look good, or whether it be distributions, or whether it be how soon can I sell it. What does this mean for Gary? And if anybody got in my way or had a different opinion, that was bad.
Okay. Yep.
That wasn't good,
For
because
them.
no, that was bad. So I was playing director, and as long as things went Gary's way, things were good.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, sometimes Gary would get mad, but most of the times I would get nicer, but I was still being manipulative
Okay.
to get my way. And they aren't blind. They could see it. Let's say, and it was a pet project. You're very intuitive. So I wanted to start a specialty pharmacy division. Now, I'm not a licensed pharmacist. So I was starting a specialty pharmacy division and forcing it down people's throats and cramming this idea down. And other people said, this isn't a good idea. And I said, well, I'll show you. And I'm the marketing guy, and I start marketing it. And they say, well, I'll show you. We won't fill the orders, and you're going to look like an idiot. Well, who looks bad? Palmetto Infusion.
Right.
We all look bad, but I'm the face out there selling something that we're not backing up. That's what I had to go in and say, I'm an idiot. I own it. I'm sorry. I was selfish. I was an asshole, and I am wrong. And here's what I'm putting in place to never do that again. I am removing myself from a managerial position so you won't ever have to deal with that again. And they were like, whoa. So not only, saying you're sorry is one thing, but putting measures in place that you don't do it again is another.
And not just measures. I mean, you took action that most entrepreneurs or business owners would never, ever, ever take. They just wouldn't do it, even if they felt the same way. They just couldn't see themselves to take that ownership and do it.
It was about putting the company, and what I've learned is feelings aren't facts, but they matter. But they really
Matter a lot. Yeah. Right.
And I stepped on a lot of people's feelings. And over the last almost 5 years, we've not only repaired that and healed those, now those same people, they run the company. They truly run the company. And it is one of the most proud things that I've ever been a part of, is to see them flourish, their careers flourish, them leading the charge. It's almost as if David and I now have to catch up to them. And we all see these quotes on LinkedIn, dictators tell people what to do and leaders inspire and all those things. To see it in a quote or to witness it in action is one's neat, one's beautiful. It's beautiful to see people leading the way in front of you.
Yeah. And it's also, it's amazing listening to you. And I think this is what I'm taking away from it, is that if you create an organization where you make people wait to be told what to do, or they can't follow you because you're always going in different directions and they don't know where the right focus is, you get, stagnant growth. You get unhappy people. You get, people who don't feel satisfied or excited about their work. But if, on the other hand, you'd say, well, here's where we want the company to go. I don't know exactly how to do that, but you're here for that reason. And we're just going to open the doors to you to support you so that we can get where we need to be. But we're going to get there the way that you and the rest of the team figure out is the best way for us, the best way for you, the best way for our customers, the best way for our company. Is that anything close to summing up what
That is very, very close. And David Goodall, my partner, and Connie Hartley, one of the original founders of the company, myself, the leadership team that we've brought in, we have watched a transformation happen. And it has been exactly what you described. It's gone from people waiting to take orders to literally us passing the baton and watching them run with it, making decisions, the empowerment of those people. Now, look, I know it may not be as beautiful as I think it is because I'm not in the trenches, but I think that it is not utopia, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
But
Never is.
it is certainly a long ways from where it was 5 years ago. And we're striving to be that company that me and you were describing.
Right.
And that's the difference. That's a huge difference of, you know, a lot of this stuff, we can learn in books, we can learn in school. A lot of ours has been on the job training. But if I had to sum it up in one word, it would be humility. We've had to learn to have humility, to learn to not be the smartest person in the room, to remain teachable.
Yeah.
Because if we think we're the smartest person in the room, then, some
You're
of
in
us
the-
are redundant. Some
Yeah,
of us are redundant.
You're in the wrong
Yeah.
room.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's funny because that's one of the things I've been thinking ever since we started here was humility, humbleness. I mean, you for someone who's had the kind of, career and achievements that you've had and are still having. I mean, right from the very beginning, I could tell that, you weren't out here to, promote Gary Cooper about how great Gary Cooper is. You've really done exactly the opposite. You sort of pointed out, one, how you got your start, how fortunate you were to, be raised by great parents, and then, how you dealt with, running the company after your dad passed away, and then how you came to these just amazing revelations about how little you knew about what you were doing. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to say you didn't know much, but how
That's
little you know.
exactly right. That's exactly right.
And how, even now, you're still learning how to be that great leader who can not just inspire and empower, but get out of the way and let people do what you want them to do, what you need them to do, what your business needs them to do. So many people, whether I have them on my podcast or you see them out there and they're like, it's all about the personal brand and who they, how much they've done. And, their inspiration is kind of like in your face, like, and your inspiration is not in your face. And I really like that because I feel like those people like you are the people who are really inspiring because you've done a lot of stuff and you are very willing to acknowledge that you have a long way to go and none of what you've done is perfect, even though it's been compared to most other people pretty damn exceptional. So Gary, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been a pleasure talking through this with you and listening to you more than anything else. I learned a lot and I really do. I'm grateful that you've been on, and I am very, very happy about your success and your revelation, intervention, and all of the things that we ended up talking about today. And most of all, that you just how you feel about your family and your friends and your partners and all of that. It's been very it's been inspiring for me to listen to. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And you obviously have a gift for what you're doing and an intuition of how to get right on a pinpoint on a topic. So it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much. And have a great rest of your day, man.
Okay, you too. My pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How'd It Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How'd It Happen podcast.